Sir, there's no way someone like you is sitting in 2D. Step aside before I call security. The words hit like a slap, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear, and cruel enough to silence even the soft clink of champagne glasses. The woman who said them, Heather Collins, the head flight attendant, didn't whisper. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even blink. She just looked at the man in front of her, an older black gentleman in a neat blazer and worn leather shoes, and decided, right then and there, that he didn't belong, and she made sure the rest of the cabin heard it too. Folks, before we dive into this story of power and public humiliation at 3,000 feet, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, hit subscribe, and if this hits home, give it a like. Now let's rewind. Because what happened on Liberty Skies Flight 186 wasn't just an insult, it was a reckoning. The airport was buzzing that morning. John F. Kennedy International. Terminal 8, just after 11 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday in late spring. The kind of day when the sky looks polished and the air smells faintly of jet fuel and anticipation. Inside the American flagship lounge, surrounded by travelers sipping bourbon and scrolling through stock reports, sat Thomas Reed, 70 years old, a retired public high school teacher from Oakland, California. Tom wasn't supposed to be here. At least, that's how it felt to him. He was more used to sitting near the food court with a backpack and a good paperback than reclining under soft, recessed lights with $30 scotch on the house. But this wasn't just any flight. It was the first time in his life he'd ever flown first class. A birthday gift, a retirement gift, and, more than anything, a love letter from his only child, Jordan Reed, who happened to be the newly appointed CEO of Liberty Skies Airlines. Jordan had made the reservation himself. Seat 2D, first class, JFK to LAX, a trip Thomas had always wanted to make in comfort, but never allowed himself the luxury to consider. He had spent 38 years teaching American history to ninth graders. He'd coached debate, volunteered on weekends, paid off the house early, helped neighbors fix their fences. And all the while, he'd done what so many others like him did. He put everyone else first. And now, in the autumn of his life, his son wanted to return the favor. "You've spent your whole life getting people where they needed to go," Jordan had said over the phone, voice low and choked with emotion. "Now let me get you there." Tom had arrived early. Of course, that's who he was. Early to class, early to church, early to the gate. He'd gotten a trim, shined his shoes, and pressed the same blazer he'd worn to his retirement dinner, in his carry-on, alongside a travel-sized deodorant and a half-finished copy of Team of Rivals. He carried the boarding pass like a passport to another world. Mr. Thomas Reed. Liberty Skies Flight LS-186, Seat 2D, First Class. He checked it 4 times before stepping into the lounge. Everyone around him looked like they belonged in a commercial. Men in Italian suits talking mergers. Women in silk scarves and noise-canceling headphones sipping cucumber water and ignoring the rest of the world. But Tom? He sat quietly near the corner, eyes on the runway, heart full of something between pride and unease. When the boarding announcement came. "Now boarding, Liberty Skies Flight 186, First Class and Apex Platinum members." Tom took a breath, stood tall, and made his way toward Gate 37. The agent scanned his ticket, smiled warmly, and said, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Reed." For a moment, Tom believed everything would go just as Jordan had promised. No complications, no questions, just a smooth ride home in Seat 2D. But the moment he stepped into the first-class cabin, that illusion shattered. The cabin was a quiet display of elegance. Cool-toned lights, lie-flat suites, champagne already chilled in small crystal flutes. He found his seat quickly, tucked his carry-on into the overhead bin, and turned to lower himself into the wide leather seat that seemed almost too luxurious to be real. That's when she appeared. Heather Collins, slim, blonde, mid-40s, a 20-year flight attendant with the tone of someone used to being obeyed and the eyes of someone who judged faster than she listened. "Excuse me, sir," she said sharply. Blocking the aisle, Tom looked up, confused but polite. "Yes?" She scanned his face, then his clothes, then his seat. "There's no way someone like you is sitting in 2D, she said flatly. "Step aside before I call security." Passengers nearby turned to look. A man with silver cufflinks raised his eyebrows. A woman with a designer purse shifted uncomfortably in her seat. One man quietly pulled out his phone. Tom, stunned, stood there for a moment, not angry, not loud, just frozen. "Ma'am," he said softly, holding out his boarding pass. "This is my seat." She didn't take the pass, didn't look at it. "Sometimes people sneak up here during boarding," she said in a syrupy voice laced with judgment. "It happens more than you'd think. I'll help you find your proper seat in coach." Tom's face flushed, not with shame, but with disbelief. "There's no mistake," he said, his voice calm but firm. "My son booked this seat for me." Heather gave a small, mocking laugh. "That's very sweet," she replied, the way one might speak to a confused patient. "But as I said, these seats are reserved for our Apex passengers. Maybe you got bumped in error." She reached toward his arm, clearly intending to guide him away from 2D, away from the front of the plane, and back to wherever she decided he belonged. That's when something remarkable happened. A young woman seated in 1A looked up from her laptop. Maya Patel, Stanford doctoral student in civil rights law, saw exactly what was happening and wasn't about to stay silent. "Excuse me," she said clearly. "I was here when he boarded. The gate agent confirmed his seat. Maybe you should check the manifest before making assumptions." Heather turned, gave Maya a polite but cold smile, then said, "Thank you, miss. I've got this under control." But Maya didn't back down. Then came a second voice, louder, firmer. Carlos Alvarez, off-duty fire captain in 3F, spoke up without hesitation. "Ma'am, he has the same boarding pass I do. Why don't you treat him with the same respect you'd give me?" His voice carried, and the tension in the cabin sharpened like a knife. Heather's smile disappeared. Her tone shifted. "Sir," she said, staring Tom down, "I am the head of this cabin. Either you move now, or you will be escorted off this plane." Tom didn't yell, didn't argue. He did what any father would do when facing humiliation he didn't deserve. He reached for his phone. With fingers trembling slightly, he scrolled to the first contact on the list. His son, Jordan, the CEO of Liberty Skies. And when Jordan picked up, everything changed. Jordan Reed was 90 seconds into explaining a $2.3 billion fleet upgrade slide to a conference room full of Wall Street analysts in downtown Chicago when his phone lit up with the two words that could still unnerve him. "Dad calling." And the moment he heard his father's strained whisper, every polished sentence he'd prepared collapsed like a house of cards. Tom tried to sound calm, but Jordan could hear the tremor, could picture the scene even before the details spilled out. And in that instant, the CEO side of him went on autopilot while the son side detonated. So he quietly closed his laptop, murmured a crisp, "Gentlemen, we'll reconvene at 2, and strode into the hallway where the Lake Michigan skyline shimmered behind floor-to-ceiling glass. Tom explained the threat: security, removal, humiliation. And Jordan's jaw tightened as he imagined his history teacher father standing alone in that violet-lit cabin while champagne flutes clinked around him. He told his dad to stay seated and keep the phone on vibrate, then fired off orders like a field commander. His chief pilot had 10 minutes to ready the Gulfstream G700 at Midway. The flight ops director was to file an immediate MDW to JFK hop, and his executive assistant would clear his calendar for 48 hours. Back on Flight 186, meanwhile. Heather Collins doubled down. She radioed the cockpit alleging an uncooperative passenger in 2D, suggested he might be intoxicated, and requested ground security at the jet bridge, an escalation that made even the junior attendants trade uneasy looks. Tom, cheeks flushing but voice steady, stayed in his seat, gripping his copy of Team of Rivals like a talisman, while around him a tension thicker than cabin pressurization settled over the rows of leather suites. Maya Patel closed her laptop and spoke again, this time louder. "Ma'am, you're creating a scene where there isn't one." And Carlos Alvarez unbuckled, rose to his 6-foot frame, and announced that as a firefighter he'd handled plenty of real emergencies and this sure ain't one. Passengers in rows 3 and 4 began checking their phones. And within minutes, social media alerts buzzed. Bloomberg pushed a headline. Liberty Sky's CEO diverts to JFK after father's seating dispute. That spread faster than free Wi-Fi. A gray-templed attorney in 4C whispered, "Uh-oh, PR tsunami," while a teenage influencer live-streamed her bewildered face. Up in the cockpit, Captain Willis Barnes, a veteran with 23,000 flight hours, received Heather's security request, cross-checked the manifest, saw Thomas Reed, F. Apex, and frowned. Something smelled off, so he radioed operations control for guidance and was told, "Hold at gate, VIP en route," back in Chicago. Jordan hustled through Midway's private terminal, Blazer whipping behind him, mind racing through both legal exposure and personal outrage. He replayed childhood snapshots, Tom sanding neighborhood benches in his spare time, grading essays at the kitchen table, teaching Jordan to keep promises, and the memory sharpened his resolve like a knife. Wheels up in 13 minutes. The G700 tore east, and Jordan used the hour-plus flight to comb through HR logs. The database revealed what he feared. Heather Collins, employee 76094, had 5 prior bias complaints, each marked resolved, coaching issued, and the pattern turned his anger from white-hot to surgical. Back on LS-186, the cabin had devolved into a standoff. Boarding door still open, engines idling, passengers restless. Heather returned, face flushed, and leaned into Tom's personal space. "Last chance, sir. The captain has authorized your removal." But Tom, recalling decades of telling teenagers to hold their ground, met her gaze and said, "My son says I'm right where I belong." That line landed like a spark in dry grass. Whispers erupted. His son? Who? And Carlos chuckled. "Looks like you picked the wrong retiree today. Ma'am." 5 minutes later, the jet bridge door thumped, and ground staff announced a VIP arrival delay, ratcheting tempers higher in economy where passengers began filming safety cards just to have something to post. Heather, nerves fraying, addressed the cabin microphone with brittle cheer. "We appreciate your patience during this brief scheduling clarification," even as her knuckles whitened around the handset. In the aisle, Maya pulled up Liberty Sky's mission statement on her phone, Zero Tolerance Inclusivity Initiative, and waved it gently like incontrovertible scripture. Nearby, a hedge fund manager muttered about stock dips, while an elderly couple clutched hands, sensing that truth was buckling the aircraft harder than turbulence ever could. Mid-air above Pennsylvania, Jordan's jet caught a favorable tailwind, shaving 8 minutes. He skimmed the draft of a press release his communications chief had started. Bland, corporate, useless, and deleted half of it, deciding the only statement that mattered would be his presence in that cabin. He glanced out the portal, watched clouds slide beneath like slow rivers, and whispered, "Hang in there, Dad," on the ground. Operations relayed the revised ETA to Captain Barnes. Barnes nodded slowly, announced to the passengers that a technical crew matter required a short wait, and privately told his first officer. "Get ready. This is going to be one for the logbook." Heather heard the announcement, realized the clock was no longer her ally, and, in a last-ditch move, tried to get Tom to sign a voluntary deplane form. Tom refused, politely but firmly, and Maya recorded the exchange on her phone while Carlos crossed his arms like granite. Seatbelt signs still dark. The cabin felt like a courtroom without air conditioning. Guilt, fear, and a growing sense of poetic justice mingled with the scent of reheated short ribs waiting in sealed carts. Passengers began refreshing news feeds. The headline now trended #Seat2D on X. Morning shows requested comment, and Liberty Sky's stock ticked down 0.5 point in after-hours trading. Yet amid the chaos, Tom Reed found a sliver of calm. He reread the Gettysburg Address margin notes he used to teach and reminded himself that dignity, once surrendered, is hard to reclaim, so he would not surrender it. 42,000 feet overhead. Jordan checked his watch. 21 minutes to touchdown. Sent a final secure text to his legal counsel to freeze Heather's roster status, and took a breath so deep it hurt. Feeling the weight of every employee badge under his authority and every expectation stitched into the airline's Liberty Wing logo. Flight 186 still sat motionless at Gate 37, sun crawling across the fuselage. When the cabin lights flickered, Heather looked toward L1, and a hush fell so complete you could hear the distant whine of an auxiliary power unit. In that hush, Tom's phone buzzed with a single line from Jordan. "I'm here." And though nobody else saw the message, something in Tom's posture changed, shoulders squared, chin lifted, as if the very idea of backup had added 20 years of strength. The cabin inhaled, waiting to see who would step through the door, unaware that the few feet of jet bridge between terminal and plane were about to become the stage for an airline's moment of truth. The first hint that something extraordinary was about to happen was the sudden hush that rippled down the jet bridge. A silence so complete it felt as though the airport itself was holding its breath, followed by the soft thud of perfectly shined dress shoes stepping across the aircraft threshold. And when Jordan Reed appeared in the doorway of Liberty Sky's Flight 186, he carried with him the electric charge of a summer storm. Tall, calm, tailored Navy suit still crisp after a sprint through JFK. Eyes sharp as runway lights, and flanked by the station manager plus 2 corporate security officers who looked as if they'd been carved from granite. He paused for a single heartbeat, scanned the cabin, found his father seated in 2D, and in that instant the entire power structure of the plane inverted. Passengers who'd spent an hour whispering now sat frozen as though a judge had entered the courtroom, while Heather Collins, suddenly conscious of her own stiff posture and wine-red lipstick, forced a brittle smile and began a rehearsed greeting. "Mr. Reed, welcome aboard. It's an honor." But Jordan's raised palm cut her words mid-flight, and the gesture, polite yet decisive, told every soul present that the script had changed, stepping forward. He lowered his voice but somehow filled the cabin. "Miss Collins, I'm going to need you to stand over there by the bulkhead while we clarify a few things." Heather obeyed, though her cheeks flamed, and behind her the 2 junior attendants practically melted with relief. Jordan nodded to Captain Willis Barnes, who had come forward from the cockpit, brow furrowed, cap in hand, and with a professionalism born of 23,000 hours, he greeted Jordan. "Sir, we're at your disposal." Though everyone could hear the unspoken thought, "Please keep my ship out of the headlines." Jordan took a breath, laid his tablet on the armrest of seat 1C, and tapped the screen so the manifest glowed bright. "Thomas Reed, seat 2D, fare class F Apex, verified," then turned it toward Heather. "Do you recognize that entry?" he asked, voice steady as a level. Heather swallowed, nodded once, and murmured something about software glitches. But Jordan kept going, each word measured, Audible to row 6, yet never rising to a shout, he summarized the allegations: verbal humiliation, threatened removal, false report of intoxication, then cited Section 4, 2 of the airline's conduct code, the policy he had personally championed 6 months earlier. Heather's eyes darted to the exit, perhaps calculating whether a strategic retreat was still possible. But Jordan, sensing the flicker, gestured toward the galley. For the moment, you'll remain on board, away from passengers, until corporate security completes its statement. Do you understand? She managed a faint, "Yes, sir," and the senior guard escorted her aft, her shoulders sagging as if every step weighed a pound. The tension that had coiled round the cabin snapped, replaced by a low murmur. Camera phones rose. Hushed voices traded phrases like, "That's the CEO. That's his dad." And in seat 1A, Maya Patel closed her video recording, exhaled, and gave Tom a thumbs up. 2 rows back, Carlos Alvarez leaned into the aisle, clapped twice in a slow, unmistakable show of support, and pockets of applause followed. Hesitant at first, then bolder, rolling forward like distant thunder. Jordan lifted a hand and the clapping subsided. Turning to the captain, he said, "We can depart once Miss Collins is logged off the manifest and a replacement purser is assigned. Operations has a standby crew on call. ETA 12 minutes. Barnes nodded. Never had he been more grateful for union rules that guaranteed reserves, and hurried up the aisle to coordinate. Meanwhile, Jordan knelt beside his father, voice softening to something only family knows. "You all right, Pop?" Tom, relief, pride, perhaps a hint of disbelief etched into his smile, patted Jordan's forearm, answered, "Better now." And Jordan felt a knot in his throat but held it back because leaders, at least in public, keep the river of emotion beneath the banks. Then he rose, addressed the cabin with the tone of a town hall moderator, formal but warm, perfect for a 50-plus audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. What happened today should never happen to any traveler, and under no circumstance will it happen again on my watch. If you experience distress, please accept my personal apologies and know that our team will reach out with compensation after landing." His words were plain, no jargon, the kind of language his father always used to reach 9th graders. And they resonated. An elderly couple in 4A, 4B nodded, and a businessman in 3C, who earlier had rolled his eyes, now looked down. Chastened, Jordan concluded. "We'll be airborne shortly. Until then, please relax and let us earn back your trust." As he spoke, a new attendant, Lena Brooks, reserve supervisor with 10 years exemplary service, boarded with crisp efficiency, conferred with the captain, and began resetting the cabin. Champagne was whisked away, replaced by chilled water until takeoff clearance. At the rear, Heather sat alone on the jump seat, staring into middle distance as if the walls had turned into mirrors, and every accusation she'd dodged over the years was now spelled out in her reflection. She heard snatches of hallway conversation, legal phrases like pattern of behavior and summary suspension, and knew the career she'd crafted from polite smiles and unspoken prejudices was collapsing strand by strand. Up front, Tom Reed closed his book, folded his hands, and let his gaze drift over the passengers. Not with triumph, but with a teacher's gentle curiosity. He noted how quickly strangers choose sides, how a single voice of solidarity, Maya's firm question, Carlos's plain-spoken defense, can tilt the scales. And he felt unexpectedly grateful, not just because his son had shown up, but because mankind, even at its most flawed, still produced everyday allies. Jordan's phone buzzed. A text from communications. Media on hold. Stock stable. Statement draft ready. But he silenced it, deciding that numbers could wait for the next 5 hours. His responsibility was a cabin full of living souls and one proud father whose dignity, once threatened, had been restored. At 1:37 p.m., the jet bridge retracted, Engines spooled up, and Flight 186 eased away from Gate 37, the afternoon light glinting off its Liberty Wing tail, inside, as the nose pointed west. Jordan finally allowed himself a breath, the kind that fills the lungs and clears the mind. And in that breath he understood that this day, born from humiliation, would become the cornerstone of a cultural overhaul he'd only dared imagine. Because sometimes change doesn't start in a boardroom or a budget line. Sometimes it starts with 6 words flung like a stone and the echo they leave in the hearts of everyone who hears them. By the time Liberty Sky's Flight 186 taxied off the apron and began its slow roll toward the runway, the cabin felt like it had just emerged from a courtroom trial. A hush lingered, fragile and thick, as if even the hum of the engines knew not to disrupt the strange cocktail of relief, shame, and awakening settling over first class. Tom Reed sat upright in seat 2D, his spine still straight from decades in the classroom. But now there was a calm behind his eyes, not the kind born of victory, but of dignity reclaimed. And beside him sat his son, CEO Jordan Reed, in 2F, who had quietly switched seats with another passenger to stay close. The captain's voice finally broke the silence with a clear, measured tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Willis Barnes. Thank you for your patience. We've resolved a personnel matter and have been cleared for departure. Flight time to Los Angeles is 5 hours and 41 minutes. Sit back, and thank you for flying with us." As the aircraft rotated into the sky, the cabin lights dimmed, and while the city fell away beneath them, something else began to rise, an awareness among the passengers that they had witnessed not just a disruption, but a reckoning. In the galley, Lena Brooks, the replacement flight lead, moved with calm professionalism, offering warm towels and gingerly reintroducing champagne service to ease the transition. But every motion was now charged with a new sense of purpose. Maya Patel opened her laptop again, but this time she wasn't studying legal briefs. She was drafting a Twitter thread. Her first tweet read, "Just watched a black elder get publicly humiliated for daring to sit in first class. Turns out he was in the right seat, and the airline CEO is his son. And yes, he showed up, and yes, heads rolled. A thread on what accountability looks like at 35,000 feet. Carlos Alvarez, meanwhile, quietly returned to his seat, removed a worn leather badge holder from his carry-on, and glanced down at the picture of his late father tucked inside. A reminder of how deeply these moments echo across generations. Pops would have said, "Speak when it matters most," Carlos muttered under his breath. Passengers who had said nothing earlier now seemed eager to compensate with polite gestures, nodding at Tom, offering smiles, even ordering less alcohol, as if sobriety might earn back a shred of self-respect. In seat 3A, an executive named Richard Langston, head of corporate accounts for a luxury hotel chain, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Earlier, he'd been one of the silent skeptics, arms crossed, brows furrowed, eyes full of judgment. But now, knowing who Tom was and watching how Jordan handled the fallout, Richard opened his company email and began drafting a memo to HR suggesting a review of his own team's guest profiling policies. That's how it starts, he thought, not with slogans, but with shame. Meanwhile, in 5C, a teenage girl named Aria, who had been live-streaming updates to her 78,000 TikTok followers during the delay, now posted a quiet video of Tom gazing out the window. She titled it, "Grace at Cruising Altitude," and within an hour it had 300,000 likes. Jordan, seated next to his father, used the in-flight Wi-Fi not to issue statements, but to begin internal repairs. He opened Slack and typed a message to his executive team. "This incident is not isolated. I want a full audit of HR case closures flagged for bias. No delays. We do this now, not next quarter." Then he pinged his chief people officer. "Pull Collins' record. If prior complaints exist and were dismissed, I want every name that signed off. The reply came within minutes. 5 previous complaints, all from minority passengers. Pattern confirmed. Jordan typed back. Termination in motion. Begin process. We're not burying this one. Tom, sensing his son's focus, laid a gentle hand on his arm. You don't have to fix the world midair, he said quietly. Jordan gave a soft smile. Maybe not the world, he replied, but I can fix my part of it. They shared a look that only years of mutual sacrifice could carve. Tom remembering the nights he graded papers by flashlight while Jordan slept. Jordan recalling the smell of chalk and coffee that clung to his father's coat every morning. Outside the window, the clouds moved like slow waves, and in that moment, it felt like time itself had taken a breath. In the back of the aircraft, Heather Collins sat in the crew rest seat, cut off from service and stripped of her authority. She scrolled her phone under dim lighting, heart sinking as she saw headlines multiply. CEO's father humiliated. Discrimination in seat 2D. Liberty skies crisis at 3,000 feet. She tried texting a former supervisor who once shielded her from formal write-ups, but the message went unanswered. She opened her email. The HR portal login failed. Access revoked. Her hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the crumbling illusion that she'd ever been untouchable. Forward in the cabin, Lena quietly slipped Tom a handwritten note on a beverage napkin. Mr. Reed, thank you for your grace. It's not often we get to right a wrong in real time. You have allies up here. Tom read it and nodded. Small gestures, but they mattered. Across the aisle, Maya watched as her phone buzzed. A civil rights podcast had invited her to speak about the incident. She glanced at Tom, then back at her phone, and typed. Yes, I'll do it. Let's tell the full story. Jordan reopened the press statement draft but decided against releasing it now. It would be easy to spin this as an isolated incident or a corporate win, but that wasn't the truth. Instead, he began outlining something larger, an internal initiative he called Project North Star, a systemic, top-to-bottom overhaul of airline culture, mandatory empathy training, anonymous crew evaluation channels, publicly transparent complaint tracking, and a new role within the company for passengers who wanted to serve as equity ambassadors. He wouldn't just react, he would redesign. By hour 4 of the flight, the mood had softened into something unexpectedly warm. Conversations bloomed. A woman from 4B approached Tom to say her late husband was also a public school teacher and that he'd be proud of how you carried yourself. Carlos bought Maya a drink and said, "Whatever you're doing in law school, keep going. We need you out here." Tom reclined slightly, finally accepting the comfort he'd been offered hours ago. When the dessert cart rolled around, he asked for the chocolate mousse, and Jordan smiled. "You're living dangerously," he joked. "I taught kids during finals week for 30 years. Tom replied, "I've earned dessert." As the flight began its descent into Los Angeles, the sun dipped low, casting golden lines across the cabin like streaks of light through stained glass. Tom looked out the window, and for the first time since boarding, he allowed himself to feel everything at once: rage, shame, hope, love, exhaustion, and pride. He turned to Jordan. "You didn't just stand up for me, you stood up for what matters." Jordan nodded. "You built me to do that," he said. "You've always been my North Star." And in that quiet descent, father and son watched the ground approach, both knowing that what happened in the sky would ripple far beyond any runway. What began with prejudice was now descending into something deeper: change, real, measurable, overdue change, and the real journey, they both knew, had only just begun. The wheels kissed the runway at LAX a few minutes past 8, And as Liberty Skies Flight 186 coasted toward Gate 159, the cabin seemed to exhale, the way a church quiets after the final hymn. Yet the real storm was gathering beyond the glass, down the jet bridge. Local camera crews were already stacking tripods. Phones were held aloft like lighters at a concert, and the instant the door cracked open, the flashbulbs began to strobe. Captain Barnes, hat tucked under one arm, offered a hushed, "Welcome home, Mr. Reed," then stepped aside while Jordan guided his father into the corridor where a wall of microphones jutted forward like porcupine quills. Tom, still in his modest blazer, blinked at the lights but stood tall. Jordan leaned toward the press pack and, in a level voice that carried the authority of both son and CEO, said, "Ladies and gentlemen, my father will not be answering questions tonight. We're tired, and frankly, he's earned some peace, but I will give a brief statement after we reach arrivals." That small boundary, spoken without heat, yet firm as oak, disarmed the more aggressive reporters and allowed security to shepherd Tom toward the escalators. Behind them. The drama continued. Heather Collins, expression blank, was escorted off the aircraft by corporate security. An HR representative served her with an official notice of suspension, and the union steward who arrived to witness the handoff could only shake his head at the mountain of prior complaints now unearthed. Twitter feeds in the terminal exploded. Hashtag Seat2D had jumped from 12,000 mentions to nearly 400,000 in 6 hours. And a live stream clip of Maya Patel explaining why quiet bigotry is still bigotry was climbing the trending list next to baseball scores and election chatter. Carlos Alvarez, walking a respectful distance behind the reeds, was mobbed by 2 EMTs on break who recognized him from a local news hit. "Man, you spoke for all of us," one said, slapping Carlos's shoulder. Meanwhile, Jordan's phone pulsed non-stop, a message from his general counsel confirming that Collins's termination paperwork was drafted, an email from the board chair requesting an emergency session at 9 a.m., a text from the airline's largest institutional investor. "Proud of the stance, but market will punish uncertainty. Call me," in the car service lane. Tom and Jordan finally slipped into a waiting black sedan, windows tinted, and for the first time since New York, they were alone. Tom exhaled, long and slow, then offered 3 words that landed heavier than any headline. "I'm proud, son." That simple sentence cracked the hard shell Jordan had worn all day. He reached across the leather seat, squeezed his father's hand, and let the silence speak the rest. Yet the night was far from over. At Liberty Skies West Coast Operations Center, an angular glass building humming with overnight crews, Jordan convened a midnight video conference with department heads. He appeared on screen in the same suit, tie loosened now, a bottle of water in hand instead of coffee, but his focus was razor sharp. First agenda item: announce Project North Star as an official task force, not a future idea, budget allocated, timeline 90 days. With Maya Patel already offered a consulting role and Carlos Alvarez invited to join a passenger advisory panel. Second, instruct HR to audit every closed bias complaint from the last 5 years, publish anonymized results, and reopen any case that showed signs of suppression. Transparency, he said, isn't a slogan, it's how you disinfect a wound. Third, freeze performance bonuses for any manager who had bypassed that process. Pending review. A few executives bristled. Predictable resistance from corners of the org chart where metrics had long trumped morality. But Jordan preempted them with a calm ultimatum. If accountability feels painful, consider what silence just cost us in reputation and market cap. Across the digital tiles, a grudging respect settled in. They understood 2 truths. Wall Street would watch the morning bell, and the public was already shaping the narrative. Back at LAX. The press finally got their soundbite when Jordan stepped to a makeshift podium near Baggage Carousel 4. He spoke plainly. no corporate buzzwords, reminding viewers that respect should never be a first-class privilege, and confirming Collins's removal plus a comprehensive cultural reset. He thanked Maya and Carlos by name, apologized to every passenger for the delay, and vowed that future compensation emails would arrive before their suitcases did. "We can't rewrite what happened at Gate 37, he concluded, but we can make sure tomorrow's flight crew reads a different chapter. Then he walked away, leaving reporters calling his name into the echo of the terminal. In a nearby hotel suite, Tom sank onto a sofa, shoes finally off, ankles aching yet spirit buoyant. He toggled the TV to a late-night news recap and watched a split screen. On the left, blurry phone footage of Heather's confrontation. On the right, Jordan's live remarks. The anchor framed the incident as a teachable moment for corporate America, and Tom chuckled. The phrase sounded like something he might have written on a chalkboard in '93. Meanwhile, Heather sat alone in an airport motel, scrolling furiously through social media, watching her name mutate into a meme, her past recast in harsh neon. Regret nibbled, but defensiveness still barked louder, and she drafted a lengthy Facebook post beginning with, "I'm not racist, but," before thinking better of it and powering down her phone. Elsewhere in Los Angeles, Richard Langston finished his memo, hit send, and poured a glass of bourbon, acknowledging, perhaps for the first time, that silence can be complicity. Maya accepted the podcast invitation, determined to turn a viral thread into legislative momentum, while Carlos texted his station chief, "Back in town. Got a story for roll call." Just after 2 a.m., Jordan finally ended his last conference call. He removed his tie, stepped onto the hotel balcony overlooking century-old palm trees swaying in the marine layer, and let the Pacific breeze cool the adrenaline still racing in his veins. Down the hall, Tom slept soundly, but Jordan couldn't rest yet. He opened a blank note on his phone and began outlining tomorrow's board presentation. Bullet 1, personal testimony. Bullet 2, financial risk of inaction. Bullet 3, moral imperative. Bullet 4, North Star deliverables. Bullet 5, new scholarship fund, the Thomas Reed Fellowship, seeded at $10 million for first-generation aviation students. He smiled, imagining his father's expression when that announcement dropped. And for the first time all day, the knot in his chest loosened. Across town, Liberty Sky's PR director finally approved the pared-down press release, 3 sentences, no spin, and scheduled it for 5 a.m. Eastern. The investor who had texted earlier received a follow-up call. Jordan explained the plan, the projected costs, the expected dividends in brand loyalty, and ended with, "If you're in this for the long haul, this is the smartest money you'll ever keep." The investor paused, then answered, "You know, Reed, conviction like that is hard to bet against." Night slid toward dawn, and in households from Oakland to Orlando, older Americans, those who'd faced their own share of closed doors, watched the replay of Jordan helping his father down the jet bridge. Many saw their own children in that protective grip. Many saw their own parents in Tom's quiet grace, and more than a few whispered, "About time somebody did the right thing." No rule book had prepared Liberty Skies for the perfect collision of bias, technology, and filial love. Yet out of that wreckage came a blueprint, written not in sterile legalese but in living moments, a retired teacher's unbowed posture, a CEO's midnight Zoom, a student's viral thread, a firefighter's plain words, a nation's collective reckoning that the sky belongs to everyone, and somewhere between those truths and the morning sunrise. Jordan finally allowed himself to believe that the hardest part, saying yes to change, was already complete. The rest was just follow-through, and he had 5 hours before the boardroom lights flickered on. Daylight had barely broken when Jordan strode into Liberty Sky's Virginia headquarters for the emergency 9 a.m. board session. And the mood in that glass-walled conference room felt like the charged air before a thunderclap. Half the directors clutching printouts of overnight stock charts, half braced for a moral reckoning they knew was overdue. Jordan, running on 2 hours' sleep, opened with a photograph of his father sitting alone in 2D, projected 10 feet tall, and the silence that followed was thicker than carpet padding as he let the image speak for him before saying, in the same calm voice he'd used in the cabin, "That picture cost us $14 million in market cap and an incalculable hit to trust. What we do next decides whether it becomes our shame or our turning point." Numbers came first. Analysts had shaved 3% off future revenue forecasts. Social media listening showed 78% of viral sentiment was supportive but demanded concrete action, and 42% of surveyed loyalty program members said they'd switch airlines if Liberty Skies failed to follow through. Then Jordan laid out Project North Star in granular detail. 30-day listening tour for frontline staff, 90-day relaunch of bias response protocols, independent passenger ombudsman reporting straight to the board, and a public dashboard tracking every discrimination complaint in real time, while the CFO, eyes wide, calculated the $27 million price tag and muttered that such transparency might scare investors, to which Jordan replied, "Cover-ups are scarier." The pushback came fast. Harrison Dukes, old Guard director and former Air Force brass, argued that isolated personnel issues shouldn't dictate sweeping reforms, but Jordan countered with a slide showing Heather Collins's 5 suppressed complaints, each initialed by middle managers rewarded for stellar on-time departure stats, evidence that the problem was cultural, not individual. When Dukes warned of union blowback, Jordan read aloud a midnight email from the attendance union president endorsing North Star because no crew member wants to inherit a colleague's unchecked bias at 35,000 feet. Momentum shifted. Head of Investor Relations nodded. General Counsel noted that radical transparency actually reduced class action exposure. And even the CFO conceded that a safer, kinder brand justified the line item. The vote was unanimous. North Star funded, with Jordan granted executive discretion for rollout. Yet victory in the boardroom only widened the battlefield outside. Cable pundits framed #Seat2D as either proof of systemic injustice or an overhyped viral fiasco. And a small but vocal shareholder bloc threatened a proxy fight over mission creep. Jordan answered by scheduling a live-stream town hall for employees that Friday, inviting Maya Patel to co-present on implicit bias and Carlos Alvarez to describe bystander courage in plain firefighter English. He also released a tersely worded statement promising swift accountability at every layer of command, a phrase that drew a sharp rejoinder from Heather's union-appointed attorney, who announced an intent to sue for wrongful termination and emotional distress. Though industry insiders privately admitted her case was thin, given the video evidence and her checkered file. Meanwhile, HR's reopened audits unearthed 2 supervisors who had dismissed not only Collins's complaints, but 9 others across different hubs. Both were placed on leave pending interviews, and word of their suspension rippled through crew chat rooms like a gust of fresh air. Back in Oakland, Tom tried to return to normal life. Morning coffee at the corner cafe, a stroll past the school where he'd taught. But normal kept dissolving under waves of recognition. Strangers offered handshakes. A city council aide asked him to keynote an upcoming equity summit, and local news vans idled outside his bungalow until he finally taped a note to the door that read, "Thank you for the kindness. Please let a teacher rest." He spent the afternoon sorting through mailed letters. One from a former student who wrote, "Mr. Reed, you taught us Lincoln's better angels. Now you showed us yours." He also found an envelope from Liberty Sky's legal office containing preliminary paperwork for the Thomas Reed Fellowship. $10 million earmarked for first-generation college students entering aviation careers. And when he called Jordan in quiet disbelief, his son simply said, "History teachers know better than anyone. Scholarships change destinies." By midweek, North Star task forces were meeting around the clock. UX designers mocked up passenger feedback apps that would allow real-time rating of crew courtesy. Procurement negotiated with a Colorado training firm to create VR bias scenarios. And fleet branding teams drafted a subtle repaint, adding a 7-star constellation near the tail, each star representing one of the initiative's core values: respect, courage, empathy, integrity, safety, accountability, vision. On the financial front, analysts noted that while Liberty Sky's shares dipped at Monday's open, they recovered by Thursday after a respected activist fund praised the company's textbook crisis response and quietly purchased a 2% stake. Even the FAA chimed in, hinting that Liberty's transparency dashboard might become an industry model if it performed as promised. Yet not all reactions were supportive. Jordan received a death threat voicemail from an anonymous caller accusing him of pandering, and online trolls flooded Maya's DMs. Corporate security traced the most serious threat to a private account in another state and passed it to the FBI, while Jordan phoned Maya to ensure she had protective resources. She replied, "I'm a civil rights lawyer in training. Fire is my workplace," and resumed drafting a policy paper linking airline discrimination to disparate security screening statistics. Late Thursday night, 6 days after the incident, Jordan stood alone in the maintenance hangar where a fresh-painted Boeing 787 bore the new star cluster under halogen lights. He ran a hand over the fuselage, thinking how strange it felt that a single moment of cruelty on one plane had recharted the course of an entire airline. His phone pinged, an investor message reading, "Market watching your town hall tomorrow. Stick the landing." He smiled wryly. Pilots used that same phrase. He glanced at the distant city skyline, then back at the aircraft, and whispered a promise to the quiet metal. "Tomorrow we show them how high decency can fly." Friday noon arrived bright and windless, and the Liberty Skies auditorium in Arlington filled like a slow-moving tide. Pilots still in epaulets, mechanics in smudged coveralls, gate agents clutching coffee cups, while tens of thousands more employees streamed the feed on break room monitors from Boise to Boston. When the house lights finally dimmed and Jordan Reed stepped onto the stage, he looked surprisingly composed for a man who had just lived the most bruising week of his career. He began not with a mission statement or an apology checklist, but with a single photograph projected behind him, his father gazing out a porthole at 35,000 feet, face calm, eyes reflective, and for a long, respectful beat. The room was so still you could hear the camera shutters of a half-dozen reporters in the back row. Jordan spoke plainly, almost as if he were addressing a history class. "That's Thomas Reed, my dad, a retired public school teacher who spent 40 years telling ninth graders they could bend this country toward its better self. Last Sunday, someone tried to bend him backward, and every one of us felt it." He paused, scanning a sea of faces that mirrored fatigue, hope, and, yes, skepticism. "So," he continued, "let's talk about where we go from here. Because an airline, like a democracy, flies only when all its parts pull in the same direction." Over the next 40 minutes, he walked the crowd through Project North Star, frontline listening sessions, an independent passenger rights ombudsman, a real-time transparency dashboard, and each point drew steady nods. But the air truly shifted when Jordan announced a new benefit. Any employee who flags discrimination and can't resolve it through normal channels will be able to text a direct hotline that pings his personal phone until the structure matures. "I won't hold that role forever," he conceded. "But until the system proves it protects both traveler and team member, accountability lives at the top." Applause rose, tentative at first, then rolling, because in an industry built on hierarchies, A CEO volunteering for midnight alerts felt like a Hinge moment. Next, Jordan welcomed Maya Patel to the stage. The PhD candidate. Black blazer, no teleprompter. Spoke in plain English about implicit bias and the cost of silence, telling a quick story. Her grandfather, barred from buying a house on the right street in 1963, still paid the same taxes as his neighbors. Bias, she said. Doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles and hands you a clipboard. The line drew a ripple of knowing laughter, especially from older staff who had seen glossy training seminars come and go. Then came Carlos Alvarez, uniform pressed, medals discreet. He described the fear spike that hits any bystander about to challenge authority and how courage is doing the right thing a split second before the wrong thing becomes irreversible. His firefighter cadences, gentle, direct, landed firmly with technicians and ramp crews whose jobs revolve around decisive moments. At the 90-minute mark, Jordan invited one last guest, Thomas Reed himself, coaxed from side stage in his modest suit. The ovation that followed surprised even the seasoned stage manager. Some employees rose because they admired the man's calm defiance, others because they recognized their own parents in his shy wave. Tom cleared his throat and offered a history teacher's brevity. Airplanes lift because the air moves faster over the top of the wing than beneath it. People lift when respect travels faster than prejudice. Keep the air moving up there. 8 words, and the hall erupted again, with emotions high. Jordan saved his reveal for the finale, the Thomas Reed Fellowship, a $10 million endowment for first-generation students in aviation and hospitality, funded jointly by the company and a matching grant from its largest investor. The big screen flashed the program logo, 7 small stars arcing over a stylized wing, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. 7 stars for the initiative's 7 values. The scholarship would cover tuition, flight school fees, or culinary arts certificates, and fellows would be paired with mentors across every Liberty Skies department. If you want future crews to see dignity as non-negotiable, Jordan said, start by inviting new voices into the cockpit. The broadcast closed with a Q&A, and the final question came from a silver-haired gate agent in Dallas, piped in via satellite. What's the biggest lesson your family wants us to remember? Jordan smiled, glanced at his father, and answered, that a seat number is temporary, but how you treat the person in it can echo for decades, Tom added softly, and sometimes the echo can lift all of us. The screen faded to the company's updated tail insignia, 7 stars freshly painted near the rudder, and in hubs across the network. Crews watching the feed spontaneously applauded. Financial analysts later called it a masterclass in crisis recovery. Civil rights groups called it an example worth federal study. But among Liberty Skies' largely older workforce, the verdict was simpler. Management had finally talked to them like grown-ups, owned the wrong, and mapped a way forward that felt both humble and big. That evening, as Tom and Jordan boarded a commemorative flight back to Oakland, nose art already bearing the constellation, Maya texted a photo of the fellowship application portal, live and humming. Carlos replied with a thumbs-up emoji from Station 23, fresh off a fire run, and Jordan, buckling in beside his father, whispered, "We stuck the landing." Pop. Outside. Golden twilight lit the runway, and as Flight 104 rolled toward takeoff, the new star cluster caught the sun, scattering light across the tarmac, a quiet promise that, at least on this airline, respect would travel at the speed of flight. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in doing what's right. Until next time, stay kind, stay grounded, and remember, dignity should always fly first class.